isn't into fencing. The main thing is that there is no use for it. Arjun step swords have survived. Lord is disciplined athlete. It's just a sport. You won't be able to fight with our weapons because both were used completely differently. Our mere weapons were created to cut, not to stab. Your weapon to stab. The blow is dealt in a completely different way. Well, I have been in exile with him for a very long time.
When it comes to honor and loyalty, it is not a common topic even in former Russia, let alone in Asia. Even with my eyes wide open I can't see anything. A man of Western culture, a blind man will say. I will say that he is someone who turns away when he sees someone else's unhappiness, even though he should see it, but it is convenient for him. Someone who just looks but doesn't see. In order for something to change in the world, you have to start seeing, not looking. Unfortunately for me, I don't have typical Asian beauty like my great-grandfather. My father still had facial features and was aging quite quickly. I don't remember the young father. I only have slightly slanted eyes, when you look closely. That's why I endure this torment, because I don't mentally fit in with a Westerner at all. For many of us, it is someone who cannot see. Mr. Nagori Asano probably saw something he shouldn't have. It's an art to see, but it's also an art to know when you're saying something. Another domain of Westerners. They speak first, think later. They do it because there is no responsibility for their words, and then they mysteriously disappear during a trip to Asia. Here the word must be supported by action. People remain silent about certain matters if they have no influence on them, even though they can see them. For blabbing everything even in the most theoretically European country in Asia, although not actually European is punishment. I agree with Catherine II. There is responsibility for words and it is painful. They have a bad habit. They believe that they will do something and be forgiven. In part, we can say that the Christian religion and its bad transmission are partly to blame for this, because if we take a closer look at the biblical texts and recall, for example, Longinus, it is no longer forgiven. Not everything can be forgiven and forgotten. The word has causative power. Lord Naganori Asano, ruler of the Ako domain, was assigned duties in the palace in Edo, the shogun's stronghold. He was to receive imperial emissaries from Kyoto. In 1701, Japan was ruled from Edo by another Tokugawa shogun, Tsuneyoshi Tokugawa, 1646 to 1709. The empress is always from this family. Now that's a precedent. The shogun is a relative of the empress. The emperor stayed in the capital, Kyoto. Once a year he sent a visitor to the shogun, who was to be welcomed with the respect due to him. The two heroes of the event met for the first time in 1694. In 1701, Tsuneyoshi appointed two princes for this purpose. One of them was Naganori Asano of the Ako Han, unfamiliar with court diplomatic etiquette. He was to be helped in this by the master of ceremonies Yoshinaka Kira, lord of Nagato. A rich and well-connected man. However, he maliciously exposed Asano to embarrassment. In 1694, Asano suffered from a serious illness. He had no children, thus no heir at that time. When a daimyo died without a determined heir, his house would be abolished by the shogunate, and his lands confiscated. His retainers became ronin. To prevent this, he adopted his younger brother Asano Nagahiro, titled Daigaku, who was accepted as his heir by the shogunate. In 1694, he suffered from a serious illness. He had no children, thus no heir at that time. When a daimyo died without a determined heir, his house would be abolished by the shogunate, and his lands confiscated. His retainers became ronin. To prevent this, he adopted his younger brother Asano Nagahiro, titled Daigaku, who was accepted as his heir by the shogunate. In 1701, he was appointed for the second time to the same office with Kami. It is said that he was then on bad terms with Kira Yoshinaka, and tension between them increased. The master of ceremonies, Mr. Yoshinaka Kira, refused to inform Mr. Asano regarding proper protocol, and was attacked by a junior warrior in the shogun's stronghold. He allegedly became upset at them, either because of the insufficient presents they offered him, in the time-honored compensation for such an instructor, or because they would not offer bribes as he wanted. Other sources say that he was naturally rude and arrogant or that he was corrupt, which offended Asano, a devoutly moral Confucian. By some accounts, it also appears that Asano may have been unfamiliar with the intricacies of the shogunate court and failed to show the proper amount of deference to Kira. Whether Kira treated them poorly, insulted them, or failed to prepare them for fulfilling specific bakufu duties, offense was taken. Initially, Asano bore all this stoically, while Kami became enraged and prepared to kill Kira to avenge the insults. However, Kami's quick-thinking counselors averted disaster for their lord and clan, for all would have been punished if Kami had killed Kira, by quietly giving Kira a large bribe. Kira thereupon began to treat Kami nicely, which calmed Kami. However, Kira allegedly continued to treat Asano harshly because he was upset that the latter had not emulated his companion. Finally, Kira insulted Asano, calling him a country boor with no manners, and Asano could restrain himself no longer. At the Matsu no Oroka, the main grand corridor that interconnects the Shiro Shoin and the Overoma of the Hanmaru Goten residence, Asano lost his temper and attacked Kira with a dagger, wounding him in the face with his first strike. His second missed and hit a pillar. Guards then quickly separated them. He was inflicted with 2 wakizashi wounds, but the very act of showing the naked blade was a violation of shogunate law. Young Naganori broke the rule of not drawing weapons in the shogun's court and injured Kira with his sword. It was enough for him to show a piece of his bare blade. Some versions mention this. In Japan, domestic peace is not disturbed. For this he was sentenced to seppuku. Mr. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku the next day. The 21st of April 1701. Nagori was 34 years old. After Asano's death, his property was confiscated. 300 of his samurai became ronin. One of them, Kurenosuke Oishi, born Yoshio Oishi, planned revenge. To protect his wife he divorced and became stray. To this end, the stray samurai seemingly lead a carefree lifestyle. In order to confuse Kira's vigilance. In hiding, Oishi, together with 46 of his most loyal ronin, gathered weapons. The revenge plan was prolonged by the shogunate's investigation, which lasted a year. Oishi's excuse was that he waited so long to take revenge to protect the common people of Akko. This cannot be ruled out. The shogun forbade revenge for Asano's death. He was aware that Kira was a man of influence. Shogun was not entirely sure what exactly happened between Asano and Kira. It was probably about taking over the property. Mr. Kira wanted to take over Asano's estate. People lived in limbo. They were neither samurai nor ronin. They considered mass suicide, but it was forbidden by the bakufu. The success of this venture required removing the aristocrats' suspicions, so the warriors took up new jobs, and Kurenosuke himself sought oblivion in alcohol and brothels. The suspicions of the bakufu also had to be averted. Contrary to the film versions, it was not an elderly man. This was perhaps what was outrageous. And here comes the problem, which probably caused the shogun to get caught in trap. Akko almost caused a revolution in the country. While Yasa is simple, bakufu is even simpler and, contrary to appearances, although penal seppuku remained in the Japanese army, it was hard to earn. Penalty, i.e., without beheading. Without a doubt, these people were operating on the border. Akko is a symbol of samurai loyalty. On January 31st, people gather in the temple where 47 samurai are buried. We wish we could always find such faithful people around us, but Kira's motivation was never known. That he was manipulating Asano was also certain for the shogun, which the movie versions try to show, but we never understood what was driving Kira. Presumed to be foreclosure. Kira, however, was not a poor person. But would a Japanese person really take out a sword just for an insult about being uneducated, while as knowing this? My partner wouldn't do it, and he was from an old family with traditions. It wouldn't be strange if Kira dropped it at the first meeting. Every crime has a motive. What was Kira's corruption? And what did Asano discover that made Kira so furious that he drew his sword? One thing is undeniable. Kira got rid of Asano in an elegant way, but why? The shogun was aware of this. This is the answer to why the investigation dragged on so long, but there was certainly something that pointed to Kira, but because he was a high-ranking person, he couldn't be touched without very hard evidence. If Kira was hiding something, he did it in such a way that there was probably no evidence. If Kira was so completely innocent, these two would not have had their sentences changed. This is a famous case. I guess everyone has heard Ako's sayings, just like chitter. Every educated person, but the motivation remains a guess. The shogun really was in a terrible situation. He thought they had done wrong. They didn't obey his order, but he certainly assumed they wouldn't, though maybe he hoped it would be sooner. They raised their swords against the higher rank because that was the way it was, but in some way he also recognized that they had the right to do so, which he confirmed by confirming that the family was to survive. On the other hand, the brother of Asano Naganori was re-established, received a revenue of 5,000 koku and the rank of Hatamoto. Shogun follows the path from hell here and decides on a hellish solution. But the best. On January 30, 1703, Oishi's team broke into Kira's residence and killed him in revenge for the senior's death. The Ako incident occurred on the 31st of January 1703 when the ronin of Asano Naganori stormed the residence of Kira Yoshinaka in Edo. While the attack was carried out on the 31st of January, the event is commemorated annually on the 14th of December in Japan. According to a carefully laid out plan, they split up into two groups and attacked, armed with swords and bows. One group, led by Oishi, was to attack the front gate, the other, led by his son, Oishi Chikara, was to attack the house via the back gate. A drum would sound the simultaneous attack, and a whistle would signal that Kira was dead. Once Kira was dead, they planned to cut off his head and lay it as an offering on their master's tomb. They would then turn themselves in and wait for their expected sentence of death. All this had been confirmed at a final dinner, at which Oishi had asked them to be careful and spare women, children, and other helpless people. Oishi had 4 men scale the fence and enter the porter's lodge, capturing and tying up the guard there. He then sent messengers to all the neighboring houses, to explain that they were not robbers but retainers out to avenge the death of their master, and that no harm would come to anyone else. The neighbors were all safe. One of the ronin climbed to the roof and loudly announced to the neighbors that the matter was an act of revenge, katakiuchi. The neighbors, who all hated Kira, were relieved and did nothing to hinder the raiders. After posting archers, some on the roof, to prevent those in the house, who had not yet awakened, from sending for help, Oishi sounded the drum to start the attack. 10 of Kira's retainers held off the party attacking the house from the front, but Oishi Chikara's party broke into the back of the house. Kira, in terror, took refuge in a closet in the veranda, along with his wife and female servants. The rest of his retainers, who slept in barracks outside, attempted to come into the house to his rescue. After overcoming the defenders at the front of the house, the two parties led by father and son joined up and fought the retainers who came in. The latter, perceiving that they were losing, tried to send for help, but their messengers were killed by the archers posted to prevent that eventuality. Eventually, after a fierce struggle, the last of Kira's retainers were subdued. In the process, the ronin killed 16 of Kira's men and wounded 22, including his grandson. Of Kira, however, there was no sign. They searched the house, but all they found were crying women and children. They began to despair, but Oishi checked Kira's bed, and it was still warm, so he knew he could not be far away. His severed head was taken to Sengakuji, where Asano was buried and submitted to the shogun's sentence. It was ostentatiously wandered through villages, and people paid tribute to the samurai. Let's call it tribute. Experts on the subject don't actually need to even have this note. The Ako warriors violated several laws. Asano drew his sword, in the shogun's stronghold. Private acts of revenge were legally sanctioned if reported to the appropriate authorities. However, this mode meant that the victim could hide or raise an army. Oishi wanted to avoid this. With Kira's army, the chances would be slim. Moreover, Kira could seek the emperor's protection. According to some sources, the shogun forbade revenge, so it was a violation of the rules of the Bakufu, but tradition said otherwise. Their souls would find no peace. Ako went from bullshit to a national issue. It was a bit like the case of the nameless man and Shi Huangdi. The first emperor of China. It was after this assassination that Shi Huangdi began to build walls and forbidden cities. Wall, 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 pylon, 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 army, 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 which was controlling the army, everything to protect yourself, but you can't trust anyone. To decide what to do with the 47 ronin, advice was sought from both Confucian and Buddhist philosophers. Shogun tried really hard, but the demons took over everyone. No common denominator found. Most citizens supported the loyal vassals. Hagakuri's supporters and more traditional factions agreed in this statement. Both groups understood Asano's motivation as revenge. However, the authorities were in a bind, because total acceptance of the behavior of the 48 ronin could lead to anarchy. It was this factor that tipped the scales, although no one actually indicated the date of revenge anywhere. It is no longer a code, but a tradition. Confucianal scholars, Sorai, Shindai, Nobukata condemned them because they placed the rules of the bakufu and social order higher. Nobuatsu, Kyuso, who wrote the account of the events, supported the nobility of Gishi's motives. Even though this is a group that condemns revenge, and Sarai's decision is believed to be binding, many members have drawn a distinction between negatively assessing the results of the warrior's actions and admiring the motivation. Tsunetomo was critical and notes in Hagyur that the vassals should take revenge on Kira immediately, without caring about the consequences, because it would be in line with the spirit of Bushido. It was another unusual situation. A Bushido fanatic from the Tokugawa period opposed the actions of loyal vassals who, during their lifetime, became the embodiment of ethical Bushido. Everything for protect powerful nobility. Tsunetomo supported the irrational, spontaneous loyalty of Wobe's daimyo to the end. This attitude of the outstanding author suggests that there was no single code of samurai ethics that all warriors would adhere to. Here lies the greatest difference between the ethical ideals of a narrow group of people of the Tokugawa era, following Bushido, and the beliefs of neo-confucianists, belonging to the mainstream of philosophy, who decided because they were officials, while the samurai were mainly Zen Buddhists. It was a debate over the superiority of result and purity of motive that was to last until the mid-20th century. Then World War II came and people started discussing something else. The shogun wanted to protect the elite from the possibility of an uprising by the nobles, although he certainly knew in his subconscious that they would do it anyway. The Japanese soul is like this and not like that. Fighting the elites. In Europe, such a conflict took place, for example in Russia, between the boyars and the new nobility created by Peter I. In a few other countries, but this one is the most famous. The boyars opposed the new nobility. A nobleman could not kill a boyar, but a boyar could kill a nobleman because he was the elder of the family. Over time, this became cleaned with decrees. In Japan, nothing was covered up by decree. This country was unchanged until Meiji era, and then Takamori, the last samurai, rose against the higher nobility. Akko returned recently, when in fact Japanese culture, smothered by the American boot, returned. Japanese culture could never be killed, but it could be sent distorted into the world. Much was sent distorted into the world, simply because Western people didn't understand Japanese culture to the end and didn't want to. The shogunate officials in Edo were in a quandary. The samurai had followed the precepts by avenging the death of their lord, but they had also defied the shogunate's authority by exacting revenge, which had been prohibited. In addition, the shogun received a number of petitions from the admiring population on behalf of the ronin. As expected, the ronin were sentenced to death for the murder of Kira, but the shogun finally resolved the quandary by ordering them to honorably commit seppuku instead of having them executed as criminals. Each of the assailants ended his life in a ritualistic fashion. Oishi Chikara, the youngest, was only 15 years old on the day the raid took place, and only 16 the day he committed seppuku. Each of the 46 ronin killed himself in Genroku 16, on the 4th day of the second month, the 20th of March 1703. This has caused a considerable amount of confusion ever since, with some people referring to the 46 ronin. This refers to the group put to death by the shogun, while the actual attack party numbered 47. The 47th ronin, identified as Terasaka Kichiman, eventually returned from his mission and was pardoned by the shogun, some say on account of his youth. He lived until the age of 87, dying around 1747, and was then buried with his comrades. The assailants who died by seppuku were subsequently interred on the grounds of Sengaku-ji, in front of the tomb of their master. The clothes and arms they wore are still preserved in the temple to this day, along with the drum and whistle. Their armor was all homemade, as they had not wanted to arouse suspicion by purchasing any. Graves of the 47 ronin at Sengaku-ji. The tombs at Sengaku-ji became a place of great veneration, and people flocked there to pray. The graves at the temple have been visited by a great many people throughout the years since the Genroku era. Oishi Chikara was pardoned. The family was to survive because the warriors remained faithful. This is a case full of paradox. The shogun had one thing left, perhaps he himself thought that this was what he would do with Kira. The Oishi family was to survive, because the country could not be deprived of such precious blood. The son is to serve Ako as the father served. The shogun was risking a lot if it was a sudden decision. Certainly, this decision also satisfied the needs of the people. This last scene from the film is very Japanese, even Perfect Altaf we speak about American productions. They really did it like assassins at a clap of hands. Contrary to appearances, especially now we could see it for ourselves. You also have to be able to die with honor. Most people, despite their belief in salvation after death, cannot die with honor. Some people can't die at all. If they could transplant themselves from other people just to stay alive, even though they suffer torture, a theory will be developed that their suffering ennobles them, but according to these religions and the existence of the soul, only the machine breaks down. They forget that this is the only certainty. The only known one thing in the life since the beginning. As the shogun noticed, not the Roninos died, but the samurais. And they did it like cherry blossoms. Spring snow. Someone who swore something and remained faithful to the end. This is not, as I heard recently, false loyalty, this is true loyalty. This is what true loyalty looks like, but it's not just a story about loyalty. It is also a story about a husband's duty and great love. We forget this when considering Ako. Samurai divorced or separated from their women so that they would not have to commit seppuku with them. It is not an honor to be the woman of a ronin, much less a ronin who has gone against the law.
Last, may say that Japan was born of sword. So, everything is actually in that saying.